Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Happy New Year to all of you. It's good to see all of you. A good turnout on a cold morning. I commend you. You are here for session one of Christian mysticism from the 13th century roots to modern day. My name is Polly Peters. I'm the co-chair of the Adult Ed Council here at Fourth Church. And this class will be led by a former Fourth Associate Pastor, Vicky Curtiss. We're thrilled to have her here teaching us. And it will be a 3-week class, January 5th, 12th, and 19th. Grab yourself a card on the way out if you don't already have one that shows our lineup for the winter season. Following this 3-week class, we will have our own fourth clergy doing a class on resilience, respect, and resistance based on all that we have going on in our world, country, church, etc. in these challenging times. Without further ado, I believe that we can get started. Let us pray. Dear God, we gather here in community this morning and look forward to another new year in which we hope to draw closer to you. Indeed, we yearn to prepare ye the way of the Lord, as we used to sing along with the Godspell soundtrack of our youth. Dear God, prepare us to experience you. Help us to encounter the divine and to realize your presence that is literally all around us, in ourselves, in others, and certainly in nature and even in the sacred ordinariness of our everyday lives. Let the recognition of our relationship be a blessing for which we are truly grateful. We thank you in your Son, Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Vicky, the floor is yours.
So, thank you for the invitation to teach about Christian mysticism. We're going to talk about what that is and why bother, why learning about it. And we're going to focus these 3 weeks on 2 different Christian mystics each Sunday. And I chose the ones I'm choosing in part because they are readily accessible to you in terms of books that have been written about them, but more importantly, what they themselves said. Not all mystics wrote up their experiences. You're probably a mystic and don't know it. And you probably haven't written about it. So I don't mean to sound that as if Christian mystics are only those who, when you look up a list of Christian mystics on Wikipedia, show up on that list. However, we're very blessed that the mystics we will be looking at did write their thoughts and their visions, and so that we can continue to learn from them. So we're going to start by quieting ourselves and being present. So I invite you just for a minute to close your eyes or lower your eyelids just to gaze softly, and put both feet on the floor and straighten your back a little bit. Be aware if there's anything that's like you might want to push your shoulders up to your ears and then back down again. Just release any tension that might be in your neck. And place your right hand over your heart. And if you're not holding something, your left hand over your diaphragm, your belly. And just take in deep breaths. So the inhale on 4 and hold it on 4 and exhale on 4. And just do this at your own pace. And in a minute, I'll bring us back together. One last inhale and exhale. Amen. Richard Rohr said, the best way to be in the presence with a capital P is to be present. And many people have turned to Eastern religions, including teachings of Ram Dass, who is famous for saying, be here now. But you actually find that same teaching, be here now, in Christianity, in Christian mystics. And we're going to today focus on Hildegard of Bingen and Meister Eckhart. So let's start with, what do we mean by mysticism? So I pulled several different sources to give you definitions that I like. Mystical is experiencing the personal presence of God, neither apparent to the senses nor obvious to the intelligence. And what does that mean? That it's beyond description. It's a way of knowing that is not mental, nor observable, and yet it's a deep knowing, a deep experience. Mystics are men and women of prayer, of intuition, who know God by experience. So a direct, immediate sense of encounter with God. Mysticism is a person's long, loving look at reality to which they are united by love. Sometimes I've heard that same definition by the same person for what contemplation is. And in the earliest years, contemplation was used for what later was defined for mysticism. But a long, loving look at reality to which they are united by love. That suggests more of an intention or more a way of seeing or approaching life through one's loving gaze. Living as a mystic means orienting the whole of yourself toward the sacred. It's a matter of purposely looking through the lens of love. And this is probably the core theme of the Christian mystics, is love. That love permeates everything, that you are unconditionally loved, that all of creation, all of God's creatures are loved. That's the core dimension of the sacred of life. Mysticism is a search for and experience of divine union. For some, it includes ecstatic experiences, but for most people, it is much simpler. A deep quieting interiorly, or a gentle sense of presence. You know beyond all knowing that God is here and that you are deeply loved. And then finally, Karl Rahner, who is a Catholic theologian, said years ago, the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. Now, that's a very strong statement, and I had not heard of it before I started working at a retreat center that was founded by Catholics. But what he means by that is that if your spiritual journey does not include or is fueled by immediate, direct, and transformative experiences of God's presence, then your spiritual journey will just become formulaic, dry, and shallow. So that's quite a call to all of us if we agree with him that, and in the Reformed tradition, though Calvin was a little suspect of affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, and thought it was important to get your mind in the right place with doctrine and that sort of thing. He still, and of course, John Calvin is one of our strongest formative teachers for what it means to be a Presbyterian. But there's still this openness, acknowledgement for God speaking to us, calling us, living through us, and we need to nurture that relationship. So I'm not going to save 10 minutes at the end for questions. What I'd rather do is have you just raise your hand and ask a question as it occurs to you. So before we dig into our first mystic, does anyone want to make any observations or have any questions? Yeah. Oh. So Marilyn.
Would you say that that's the basis of the monastic orders in the Catholic Church? The monastic that are their sole existence is just to pray and be observant. Is that sort of a mysticism or no?
I would not say that's the core. Did everybody hear the question? My understanding of religious orders within the Roman Catholic Church is that they each were founded by a particular person, and they each have a particular charism. So like I work at a retreat center founded by the Racine Dominicans, and the Dominicans have been orders of both men and women all over the world, founded by Dominic. And they have a particular, since we're going to be talking about a Dominican, Meister Eckhart was a Dominican. Vatican II said each order needs to return and really become clear about their particular charism. And the Dominicans, for example, have OP as the initials after their name, which stands for Order of Preachers. So their particular charism was to be out in the world, witnessing to their faith, both in their words and in their deeds. And they're known mostly for teaching and work for justice. So each religious order has its own emphasis, and many of them are not, there are a few that are cloistered, meaning they're not out in the world doing ministry or mission, but rather praying or more in solitude. But those are more in the minority. Does that answer your question? Okay. Someone else have a?
Great example would be in the order that we visited on our pilgrimage near Ghost Ranch, that those priests prayed hourly, and I forget the name of that, but
There's a Benedictine
yeah,
format with 7 different times for prayer.
yes.
And there are many religious orders who follow the Benedictine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's look at, Oh.
This is a real quick question. So if you talk about an individual talking in tongues, would that be a type of mysticism, or has nothing and shouldn't have nothing in the physical sense, like, using your mouth.
So a mystical experience is not limited. Like, you definitely see a vision, or you definitely talk in tongues, or you definitely hear something. It's more an experience of just, if Martin Buber would call it an I thou, it would be a sense of being in God's presence in the way that feels unitive, or a sense of oneness, as if there's no separation between you. So some mystics might speak in tongues, but other people who speak in tongues may not be mystics. So that's not the, yeah. All right, we're going to focus on Hildegard of Bingen first. Hildegard was a 12th century German. Both of our mystics today are from Germany. She was a Benedictine abbess, writer, prophetess, preacher, musician, healer, herbalist, botanist, philosopher, visionary, administrator. And as recently as October 2012, the Roman Catholic Church named her a doctor. And there are only 4 doctors out of 36 who are women. So this is not a status that's given often or lightly. She was the 10th of 10 children in her family, and her parents decided to tithe her, give a 10%. They dedicated her to religious life. So at the age of 8, she studied with a woman named Jutta, who was an anchoress. An anchoress is someone who would live in a little portion built onto the side of a church that would have a window into the sanctuary and a window onto the street. And Julian of Norwich, who we will talk about next week, was also an anchoress. The window into the sanctuary was the source of where their food would come. The window onto the street would be where people who were seeking spiritual counsel would come. And so from the age of 8, she studied with Jutta and lived with Jutta, and they became very, very close friends as they got older. And Hildegard said that she started having visions even at the age of 3. They would be visions of great light. Now remember, not all mystics have visions, but she did. But people didn't seem very comfortable with her talking about them, so she stopped talking about them. And later on, she had them, and then at the age of 43, she was stricken ill, and she heard the words, "You must write." And so she began to talk about what she was seeing in these visions, and she became well. But it took her about 10 years to not only talk about what she was hearing and seeing, but she also oversaw paintings of these visions, some of which are in a book that Matthew Fox put together back in the early 80s called Illuminations. And she did not paint the illuminations, but she oversaw those who did. She was a musician, and she did compose songs also that she heard. And I'll bring a CD next week and play you one of those. But this is a vision she saw about herself, depicting herself. The visions I saw were not in sleep, nor in dreams, nor in my imagination, nor by bodily eyes or outward ears, nor in a hidden place, but in watching, aware with the pure eyes of the mind and inner ear of the heart. You hear that phrase every now and then. My heart, the ear of my heart heard, right? So the time in which Hildegard lived, as well as Meister Eckhart, were, if we think we're living in chaotic times, which I think we are, they definitely were too. For Hildegard, there were people being sent to fight in the Crusades. It was also the time in which nations were starting to be formed. Nation states, where before there were just all these separate, tribes, and universities were being founded. But it was also a time where heretics were being burned at the stake. So it's pretty remarkable that Hildegard's writing and preaching and teaching was not only supported in the church, but she had many, many people drawn to her. And she ended up, one person I was reading says she was a goat being an acronym, GOAT, greatest of all time, in the sense that it was still a very patriarchal culture in which she lived. She was not highly educated in the formal sense, and she sometimes struggled. I think that's been part of why she was hesitant to write about what she had been seeing or hearing prior to that. But she became quite a voice in within the church, and she wasn't at all hesitant to let the Pope, whoever the Pope was in charge at the moment, know her critique of them, that they were weak or corrupt, and in her lifetime, this is part of the chaos. There were, let's see, 13 popes and 12 anti-popes who claimed the chair of Peter. So you just imagine that. It would be like Trump getting reelected, every other year. It would just be that much chaos, right? Or any other president getting elected every other year. Just all this transitional chaos and confusion of leadership. All right, so let's look at what it is that she taught and preached about. She invented the word viriditas, and several meanings for that word might be verdant or greening power or thriving or vibrancy or life force. And one of my favorite quotes of hers, as if God is speaking first person: I am the breeze that nurtures all things green. I encourage blossoms to flourish with ripening fruits. I am the rain coming from the dew that causes the grasses to laugh with the joy of life. I am the yearning for good. And it parallels what we know in scripture when Jesus says, I'm the vine and you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, fruit that will last. Now, in our day, when we're so aware of climate change and ecological disasters, we might stop and think, how might our relationship to creation have been different over decades and hundreds of years if we had had this same theological and spiritual relationship to nature. Panentheism means seeing God manifest in all dimensions of nature. It's different from pantheism, which suggests that's the only way that you see God. We know God is beyond nature, but also that God is permeating all of creation. And so when she says the grasses laugh with joy of life, that God is this just thriving, I'm going to make life happen, whatever crack in the sidewalk I can find. That was her sense of how God was in the world. And we need that type. That's why one of the reasons that I think it's important to learn from the mystics who may be lifting up parts of our own stream of what we were taught, to balance it or to fill in the gaps, which the contrast being instead of exploiting nature or feeling like we can do whatever we want with the earth and there won't be any consequences. Her many of the visions she had that she then meticulously described and oversaw being painted took the form of mandalas or circles. And a circle would be one of her preferred images for God. So just as a circle embraces all that is within it, so does the Godhead embrace all. No one has the power to divide the circle, to surpass it, or to limit it. And we know mandalas show up in other religions, and that the circle is a very archetypal symbol, but for her to claim it as a major image for the Godhead, and Godhead in German is actually a feminine word. And you'll see this in many of the mystics as well, that they're lifting up the divine feminine aspects in ways that our Western Christian stream has not. So divinity is like a wheel, a circle, a whole that can neither be understood, nor divided, nor begun, nor ended. And this is her vision of the Trinity. You see this blue man in the center. We could spend the whole class just unpacking this image, but I want to cover different ground. But it's fascinating that many of her visions of God included light. And my supervisor, where I work at the retreat center, once said something about, so does this person adhere to 2 men and a bird? And I'm like, what's 2 men and a bird? Well, you know, the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And if you think about it, I don't know if you've gone into lots of European churches, but many times that is the way the Trinity gets depicted. In fact, I was watching a movie with my housemate the other night. Maggie Smith portrayed a homeless woman that living in a van. Lady in a Van is the name of the movie. And at the very, very end, she made known that she wanted her story to end with her ascension. And so they have her ascending and the clouds open. And of course, the figure of God is still represented as a white male with a long beard, right? Well, how many of us, I mean, if you had to image God, how many of us somewhere had that impression? So but to think about the persons of the Trinity without even having bodies for two of the persons, right? She's really expanding, helping us use our imaginations. And she's saying, she's not a systematic theologian, meaning not someone who is trying to orderly organize their thinking about God. She's reporting on her experience. So she's experiencing or having a vision of God, Father as and the Spirit both as circles. And she goes, the Creator is brightness. The brightness has a flashing, which is the Christ, and in the flashing forth is fire, the Spirit. So this theme of everything is interconnected is also very strong, not only with her, but in Meister Eckhart and in others that we'll see later too. The web of the universe. And wisdom, she equates with compassion. I, wisdom, bind together heavenly and earthly things as a unity for the good of people. And so you should handle and cleanse the wounds of those who are sick, and you should maintain the innocent and righteous. And with God's help, let your heart rejoice with one as much as the other. And then God hugs you. You are encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. And again, let's just, maybe you were fortunate enough to be nurtured by a faith tradition that you knew God was love and you knew you were loved by God. But that's not the only God that's out there. We know that many people worship a God of judgment or of wrath, or you won't be forgiven unless you repent. So I just want us to remember the radical difference of her sharing something like God hugs you. That's quite different than God is keeping a list and checking it twice, right? Another mandala that represents rows and rows, all these circles of the angels and all the creatures of the earth and the heavens. Everything is praising God. Everything that is in the heavens, on earth, and under the earth is penetrated with connectedness, penetrated with relatedness. God has arranged everything in the universe in consideration of everything else. I heard a voice from heaven say to me, the all-powerful and ineffable God, who was before all ages, but herself had no beginning, nor will she cease to exist after the end of the ages. She it is who formed every creature in a marvelous way by her own will. Now, I remember getting in trouble when I first referred to God as she and her. And Hildegard, maybe she got in trouble for it, but she didn't seem to let that hold her back, because this is what she was hearing. We're living in a day now when we are invited to say, what are your preferred pronouns? And so the gender bending nature of our identities is a little more fluid than it has been up until recently. So when we talk about Julian of Norwich next week, we'll hear her refer to Jesus Christ as mother. And she has no problem with that. The gender thing just doesn't get in there. So I find that refreshing. Mm-hmm.
Transcendence of all of these issues. Why is it such a problem to call God He or Jesus He? It's very, we're truly transcendent of this. You would read the Bible and not subtract or add to it like before. And it says that God is a father. These are things to make us understand that we are loved and embraced and hugged by a Father who loves us, even if we don't have a Father here. And I don't like microphones, but I just think that this whole thing with the pronouns is like George Orwell's Animal Farm. It's just distracting people from the real issues. You are doing an academic type discussion on mysticism, which is already very, very difficult because they are kind of contradictory. But because we can only express experiences and allow people to have their own experiences, which can be mystical. So these monks who are doing their repetition, perhaps for them it is mystical. We are not to judge whether it is or not. So this whole thing, it's just getting hung up on the pronouns. It says after this life, there's no male or female. So why are we so obsessed with it right now? It seems like a distraction from truly transcendental thinking to get to the core of spirituality. We're hung up on pronouns. It makes it's a waste of time, isn't it? I don't know.
So there's so much that you just said that I don't think I can respond to all of it, because there's one issue about what's going on in our culture right now around our use of pronouns. That's its whole issue, which would take several minutes to talk about. And then there's this whole issue about pronouns in relationship to God, and what does the Bible say? And actually there are numerous references to God in the feminine voice or with feminine images, like she's a hen that gathers her chicks, for example, or in the Bible. And it's Isaiah. Well, the hen, that's actually in the New Testament. I think it's in Luke. The one I was just thinking of was, I've carved you on the palm of my hand. How could I forget you any more than a mother could forget the child in her womb? That's in Isaiah. Well, it never says God is male either. It's all metaphor. They're references. So that's a whole class. I'd be glad to teach that class on different images, different images for God. So I think I need to,
We have to continue the
yeah, I think I need to,
class. Well,
I'll have to look it up
yeah,
myself.
well, after the fact.
Okay. Yes.
Gathering chicks is Matthew 23:37.
Matthew 23:37
37.
is the hen gathering her chicks. Thank you. All right. Yes.
Brings up for me is the omnipresence of God in all of us. So if somebody wants to call it a male or a female, it's just the omnipresence of God is amazing to me.
So part of a mystical experience is that it's hard to describe, it's hard to name, it's hard to find a language. And even having binary pronouns doesn't work for everything.
Yeah.
I'm lifting up what Hildegard lifted up, what she was hearing, what she was seeing. And part of what I'm lifting up is to what fills in some of the gaps. So yes, God is beyond gender. Eckhart would say, whatever you understand God to be, God is not that. So whenever we think we're even getting close, no, you're boxing God in. However, at the same time, and there's so much paradox, it's important to name and identify that there are feminine dimensions of the deity, as well as masculine dimensions, as well as totally gender-free dimensions. I mean, when you talk about manifesting, God manifests through all creation, there's no gender in that. Agape, uh-huh.
I think of agape and yeah, I'm losing my thought on this, but but yeah, male or female, it just seems it doesn't really matter. It's just like we have chickens and we have goats. But
Right.
If God
Again,
is
I don't want to get
omnipresent,
too
Oh,
far
okay.
into just the gender thing, just because this is all ineffable, right? And she's trying to write down and speak of something that it's hard to figure out what language to find for it. Okay.
But it says that we can be both and.
Both and is a,
And we could be mystics, and it reminds me of experience that I had being.
Mike.
This is great.
It reminds me of experience that I had as a seminarian where I noticed that the Korean students were really very bright, but struggling to write their sermons. And I needed a little job. And so I got a job as a tutor. And we had conversations about their heritage, and there was no conflict in being Confucian Christians, Buddhist Christians. So they were able to hold in their hearts dual identities. And this feels the same to me.
Right.
And that is the dual identity of allowing us to be both and.
Yes. And Richard Rohr, I don't think we'll focus on Richard Rohr, but if you read his books or his daily meditations, one of his strongest themes is non-duality. And that Western Christianity has the redemption fall framework, which is distinctive from creation-centered spirituality. Redemption fall framework is very dualistic. Creation-centered spirituality is both and oneness and unitive and paradoxical and able to hold it all. All right, I'm afraid we're not going to have time to get to enough of Meister Eckhart, so I'll just quickly, this was another one of her illuminations depicting Mother Sophia. Sophia also is in scripture. In the Proverbs, she's referenced as a co-creator with God. And holy wisdom, soaring power, who encompasses us with wings unfurled, carry us, encircle us from above, below, and through the whole world. And then another thing she says, O highest wisdom, who circles the great circle, who envisions the whole world as one living path, you have 3 wings. One wing soars in heaven, one wing sweeps the earth, and the third flies all around us. And then she gives more imagery around God as mother of all that is natural, human. And you, in your sheet of quotes, I just lifted up a few quotes, hopefully ones that are a little more self-evident in their meaning. But she talks, you'll be able to look at those on your own. Okay, we're going to switch quickly to Meister Eckhart, and we're not going to be able to give him his due, but he was a 13th century, so he lived 140 years after Hildegard of Bingen, also in Germany, both of them in the Rhineland area, the area in Germany just west of the Rhine River, a Dominican, which means that he also was a preacher. He probably was, spent most of his time preaching. He was a professor, a priest, a theologian, a philosopher, and a mystic. Now, we don't have a record of him having visions like Hildegard did. However, and one person wondered if he should be called a mystic rather than just a theologian. Shouldn't say just, but because some of his teachings or preaching seem to connect with his referencing his experience of God, they felt like that qualifies to be a mystic. He's referencing how he experiences God. Now, unlike Hildegard, who, as we just heard, was named a doctor of the church in 2012, Eckhart was tried for heresy. Then he died before the verdict came down, but he was I guess the trial was never finished. I get different readings. One said that he was declared a heretic. The Dominicans themselves tried to rehabilitate his status a couple decades ago, and the word from the Vatican was, well, there's no need to do that because he was never named, and there were just 28 of his teachings that were questioned. But he himself said, theologians may quarrel, but the mystics of the world speak the same language. I am including some of Hildegard's images again to show where his wisdom echoes her wisdom. They had the same experience. So here, for Eckhart, God as love or God as compassion was central. You may call God love, you may call God goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. Whatever God does, the first outburst is compassion. The seed of God is in us. Pear seeds grow into pear trees, hazel seeds into hazel trees, and God seeds into God. What he doesn't say in here, but many other places. We, human beings, are the God seeds. And a favorite reference of his for us is that we radiate with a spark of light from within. So that we are made in the image of God, but he images that as a spark of light from within. Love will never be anywhere except where equality and unity are. And there can be no love where love does not find equality or is not busy creating equality. Nor is there any pleasure without equality. Practice equality in human society. Learn to love, esteem, and consider all people like yourself. What happens to another, be it bad or good, pain or joy, ought to be as if it happened to you. If you want to know God, become love. If you want to know others, become love. If you want to know yourself, become love. And if you want to know love, forget all you thought you knew and needed to know and become love. Some have said that the reason that he was tried for heresy was not because of what he was teaching, but because he would preach in German rather than Latin so that he would be speaking the people's language. He was an advocate for the poor and was very critical of how corrupt the church had become, seeking more and more money. One of the popes said he had a mink pillow, for example. And so it was more because of his economic and political and social justice pursuit that he was tried for heresy rather than what he was teaching or preaching. But like this same mandala that Hildegard saw, he says the essence of everything is relation. That theme of interconnectedness again. He also is similarly to her viriditas of verdancy and greening power and everything thriving. He uses a lot of imagery about newness and birthing. In fact, one of the very first introductions I had to Meister Eckhart was on a Christmas card. And it was the very last line of the quote on this slide. We are all meant to be mothers of God, for God is always needing to be born. What precedes that? What good is it to me if Mary gave birth to the Son of God 1400 years ago, and I do not also give birth to the Son of God in my time and in my culture? The first gift of the Spirit is newness itself. Be willing to be a beginner every single morning. And suddenly you know it's time to start something new and trust the magic of beginnings. So this creativity which was so much of Hildegard's and Eckhart's experience, but not just their experience of God, but how they expressed and manifested this creative force in their own lives. She was a musician. He was a preacher. They turned to the arts and they saw the arts as important expressions. Now, this is such a only your big toe got into the water experience, and I'm sorry that it's so brief, but what I'm wanting to do is introduce you, whet your appetite so that you will read more and learn more. I bought this book called Breakthrough, Meister Eckhart's Creation, Spirituality, New Translation in the early 80s. And I did not read in it until last week. This was the first translation into English of Eckhart's sermons. And it was done by Matthew Fox. And it's 34 of his sermons with commentary by Matthew Fox. But look how thick it is. And that's just 33 of his sermons. And he preached for years and years and years. What I'm grateful for is that more recently, John Sweeney and Mark Burrows have written these size books, several of them, in which you open up a page and you can just read a single poem on that page. He did not write poetry, but what they've done is take thoughts from his many, many sermons, turn them into poems, and they're such that you only want to read one a day and sit with it and work with it and what's the word I'm looking for? When you marinate. Let the poem marinate with you. So I'm going to end with a couple things to marinate about from Meister Eckhart. We live our lives in restlessness and confusion while always carrying a light within us that no darkness can extinguish. And a love that is stronger than every sort of hate. And when you find that solitude in the inner motion of your spirit, and not just in thinking about God, you'll find that God will never leave you and will shine forth in everything and be radiant in all that is, even in you. And notice there's such a difference thinking about God than being one with God, being God. He even says we are God at some points, but you certainly have to take into context, what does that mean?
What it reminds me of is a poem, Accept the Invitation.
Accepted,
Accept the invitation.
accept the invitation.
To love, to God, to, yes, so.
Which is an interest, accept the invitation is interesting because we cannot achieve being a mystic other than by our intention and by our stance to be receptive. Any mystical experience we may have comes as a gift. But that stance of being open, and I mean, sometimes the paradox in Eckhart's writings are, he talks about letting go of yourself, but he also talks about coming home to yourself. It's yourself where God, not only, but God makes home in yourself. But so it wasn't until Thomas Merton that started defining false self and true self. But the self that you let go of are all the distractions or anxieties or certitudes that you have that may be getting in the way of actually accepting the invitation?
Actually, the person that wrote it, I did a master's degree in spiritual psychology, and then also after that, soul-centered leadership. And the person that wrote that, everybody asks her for it. So I was in Santa Monica, not here, like in Chicago. But
Maybe you
I'm
could
going to
bring-
try to find it. I'll
Yeah,
it
bring a
if I can
copy
find
to
it.
class.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Quick questions. Are there mystics today?
Yes,
And if so, could you name one or two, or maybe you're going to do that in
we're
another?
going to do that in the third class.
Okay. And
You'll have to come
secondly,
back.
the
And you might be one yourself.
okay.
Okay.
The things that are on your slides, we got a handout. Are all those things on your slides on this handout?
Not
Do I
the-
have to
not
get a
these last
copy of
three
your
slides. The last 3 slides are not on your handout.
But everything else is.
I don't know. I'd have to go through and see. Most. Yeah. All right. I'd like to finish these last 2 slides before we take another question.
Oh.
So listen to into the wilderness. So you want to meet God and hear the eternal word? Desiring this will take you on a journey into the heart of now. Remember, I started about be here now. But to arrive, you must first let go of yourself. Abandon what you expect and hope for. And when you've emptied yourself of this, you'll have room for God to come to you, but not as you imagined. Don't expect great fanfares or grand gestures. Listen into the wilderness within. Love yourself boldly beyond all that you've done well or failed to do. It's really not about us. Begin today. And finally, if you want to discover the truth about God, don't strive for things that lie beyond you. Draw your thoughts inward to the center and seek to become one and simple in your soul. Let go of all that distracts you, all you desire, and come home to yourself. And when you do, you'll become the truth you first sought. Now, the authors who put these together, I was privileged to be on retreat with Mark Burroughs, and he said, sometimes with these, it's not that you keep rereading it and reading it and reading it until you think you understand what it means. Sometimes it's more, well, it's that marinating thing. It's like you just let it wash over you, like poetry sometimes does. And just kind of live into. So what I'd like you I'd like to end the class with just you thinking about when am I not at home with myself? When am I not at home with myself? When you are not at home with yourself, you're not at home with God. And what leads you to not be at home with yourself? And then be thinking, and we'll talk about this the next couple of weeks too. What helps you come home to yourself? What helps you come home to yourself? If we'd had more time, we would have shared with each other a little bit about your thoughts. So, all right, last question.
Oh, thank you very much. I have to say, I loved your lecture or talk or whatever it was. It became almost a meditative experience for me. And I just wanted to share, when you said come home to yourself, an experience that I have had that has helped me do that. It may not work for everybody, but it certainly worked for a lot of people I know. I took a class in art as meditation, and it's meditative drawing and painting. You don't have to be an artist. You don't have to paint anything recognizable. You pick up a brush with a color on it and you just start. And you marinate yourself
Yes,
in the painting.
yes.
And it's incredible. A lot of what I painted were circles over and over and over again. And I lost myself
Yes.
in it. And
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
it was
We
a
will-
wonderful experience.
We'll talk more about what are various things that help you get to the place that you were describing. All right, my friends, I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one after the class if you would like. And I hope you come back next week. I know we'll be talking about Julian of Norwich. I haven't quite decided on the second person. So if you have someone that you really hope I'll talk about, let me know. All right.